Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Hydragons Breath Bow Wow, welcoming you back to another Archon's Adversaries. We are moving to the war for Indiga. That's right, new adversaries campaign, new adversaries campaign. It is time, my friends. We continue. So, this one has been particularly long in the making, I'm not going to lie. We had quite a few interruptions there in our schedule, now didn't we? We had a couple of to-do videos before we got to our channel annual celebration, then of course we had the annual celebration, and then the short cooling off period, but I am back now and adversaries shall begin, or rather resume, in earnest. So, today we are talking about the planet of Indiga and the series of, I would argue, very unfortunate events that result in its being included within our Adversaries series. Now, Indiga is a strange world, and in terms of Imperial typography, it is a world type that does not exist anywhere else within the Imperium. It is called, or it was called, a menagerie world, or a zoological world, for lack of a better term. Now, to basically explain the history of Indiga, you have to understand Principa Argoi. Now, Argoi had an obsession. He was the equivalent of the planetary governor, and his intent, or I would argue his obsession, was with collecting rare and dangerous Xenos abominations from around the Imperium. Now, this would normally be something that gets you in trouble with a various number of Imperial administratum, or possibly even inquisitorial individuals, but Argoi has one particular advantage over most. He is filthy rich. Now, Argoi's personal intent, the arc of deadly creatures essentially, was intended to do two things. One, it satisfied his personal need to observe, hunt, and, have this zoological preserve, much like Jurassic Park, of dangerous and, in some cases, simply outlandish creatures from all over the Imperium. Now, of course, as we know, there are many different beasts and creatures that do not fall into the standard lexicon of animals that we know today within the Imperium, but rarely do we get to see them all in one place. Thus was Argoi's intent. And how was he able to afford such an expensive intent, and of course turn his planet into an absolute hellhole in the doing? Well, Indiga is rich in natural minerals, most specifically in surface chem mining minerals and in chemically easy to refine materials from its jungle-like surface. We'll get to that in a second when we talk about Indiga's tithe, but first off, how does Indiga go from bad to worse, let's say? Well, the original goal for the menagerie world was actually achieved. The massive, extensive project works of bringing likely tens of thousands of paired male and female beasts and abominations to the planet was actually shockingly successful. Argoi able to spill out some of his McDuck-esque fortune in order to provide himself with infinite entertainment. And of course his planet with a very, very impressive designation of Menagerie World, which literally does not apply to almost any other planet in the Imperium. So, things seem to be going well for a bit until a very unfortunate earthquake cracks open the entirety of his zoological preserve. Many, if not most, of these large, terrifying, and deadly Xenos abominations break loose and hybridize, breed, and multiply within Indiga's vast jungle forest network. This turns the planet into one of the Imperium's only man-made death worlds. It is essentially a planet that the Imperial Governor has completely ruined because of his own obsession with massive and deadly creatures. Now, you might say, that sounds like a stupid lore blurb that wouldn't get included in anything. I'm not making this up. This is 100% canon. I'm gonna break character for a minute. This is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life, and I am 100% for it. The whole background of Indiga, this kind of like arc of deadly creatures breaking loose, basically a one-to-one with Jurassic Park, and it spawning the Indigan prefects, I love this. I fucking love it. I love that I get to inherit this as a setting, but let's go back in character and continue here for a moment, because just the sheer hilarity of this being the only man-made death world in the Imperium, because Argoi is just a complete idiot and didn't plan for these things to be earthquake-proof, and also intentionally got male and female breeding pairs of every deadly Xenos. At least in Jurassic Park, they weren't stupid enough to get things that could have kids. So, you know, there's that. Now, the tithe for Indiga in the modern day is made up by two things mostly. You have the Guard, which it has begun to develop in a natural response to being overwhelmed with Xenos abominations of various sizes. These are the Indigan prefects, who we'll be talking about in a good bit of detail during this video. And then surface chem mining. Now, mining and chem mining are two different things. You can strip mine the way that Indiga has it, but the main thing that Indigan mines are intended to do is essentially create massive sections of the planet's topography that are completely clear of all living things. It is essentially a goal to convert the planet's surface into commodities. Now, this is not regenerative in any way whatsoever. The maximum amount of regeneration provided by this series of chem mines or mobile strip mines is essentially dumping garbage and trash out of the back of these massive vehicles and using that as ersatz fertilizer. But between all the flowers, all the trees, all the natural fuels, not to mention anything that can be found and stripped from the surface of the planet very, very slowly, as if you were peeling an apple, that is how Indiga tends to make its tithe, in addition to giving up the best of its Imperial Guard forces to the Imperium at large, as very, very specialized troops. We're talking like the upper 10% in terms of eliteness. They are very, very nice. We'll go over why. So, what about this world? Well, it is Guard Recruitment World now. That is the official designation. Now, many Guard Recruitment Worlds really pride themselves on their martial history. Indiga is not that way. The Indigan prefects are not coming from a long martial history. Their martial history is dealing with Argoi's fuck-up, essentially. So they are a specialized anti-monstrous / specifically anti-Xenos force of light mechanized or heavy infantry regiments on world. Now, when it comes to off-world troops, aka what they send out to the rest of the Imperium, it's pretty much heavy infantry or shock infantry. A majority of them are equipped with special infantry weapons, ranged weapons, usually they're specialized shotguns, we'll go into that in a bit, but then they also have specialized equivalents of light carapace or even carapace equivalent armor, depending upon how you want to equivocate about it. Now, they have some specialties of their own and some special weapons, but in general, they're a pretty bog standard regiment. There's not anything particularly unique about them, except for some of the ways that they're organized on world. We'll get to that in a minute. So, the Indigan prefects and all their speciality aside, what is life like on Indiga after this falling from menagerie into man-made death world? Well, it's pretty unique. Essentially, there are 3 on-world regiments, including the heavy elite, what I call the immobile regiment. That makes up the training corps for the Indigan prefects. These guys are around the only immobile structure on world, which is the spaceport. It's basically the largest quote-unquote city that isn't moving around. But if that's the largest city that isn't moving around, where are the other 2 regiments of guardsmen that are mechanized, and where is the rest of the population? Well, the majority of the population live and work and subsist in massive mobile megastructures referred to as SMS 1 through 50, which slowly crawl along the planet's surface, strip mining and clearing huge swaths of jungle and topsoil. This is very much a la Mortal Engines. These are these are rolling and crushing cities that go in massive stripes along the entire planetary map, stripping the surface, crushing all organic matter and inorganic matter into their massive consumptive maws, and then slowly processing out anything of value, removing it from the planet's surface, and then dumping the rest of it in its wake, leaving essentially huge tract marks on the surface, a la a giant moving strip mine. These SMSs are huge. Let's talk about exactly how big. The falling star we'll get to in a second, but the SMS are referred to as such because they are referred to as survival mining structures. Now, you'll notice I've put a bunch of pictures of the Irie, which is a fleet-based blood-packed aircraft carrier, because this thing here is essentially equivalent to what the SMS is. They are 50 mobile megastructures with 4 levels on massive treads, and they travel incredibly slow. Like, you could walk and keep up with these things at their regular pace. Now, they can speed up a little bit, essentially going from like 1 to 2 miles an hour up to about 8 miles an hour, but they can't go at extreme speeds because they're intended to essentially gravity crush anything that they're running over. They're also very wide to prevent them from flipping, and it means that there are quite circumspect or specific areas where they can fit, and they have a very long, basically a year plus circuit around the planet's megacontinent that allows them to strip materials in a more efficient way. Essentially, as they go around the planet stripping out materials and mining the surface, they need to wait a certain amount of time and change their trajectory a little bit so that they can get more resources. Naturally, with the mining, they spit out rocks to either side so that they get to a new layer next time, but considering that there are 50 of these things, they can't be moving too much or they'll get in each other's way. Now, I'm not saying that there's a massive problem if they get into each other's way. They are relatively slow, but stopping one of these things, given that it weighs probably thousands of tons, that's a little bit hard. So it's much easier to slowly move it as if you were trying to angle a continent away from something to prevent it from impacting one another. But even with that, they have a large population, over 30,000 people living in about 3 million square feet total in terms of the 4 levels. And this makes up more than half of the 1.5 million total planetary pop. Now, of the population of 1.5 million, that's essentially what survived what happened to Indiga. Things did not go well after the couple of years of absolute heinous nightmare that turned them from menagerie into death world. So the population isn't high. It's probably a 1 to 2% of what it used to be. There was a mix of massive die-off and then also plenty of starvation, and a good solid mix of Xenos abominations eating everyone to death, and of course the classic Imperial evacuation of everyone who actually mattered. Most of those people didn't want to come back to Indiga. The ones who were still there at the end were essentially those who survived in the ruins and then were, let's say, forcibly encouraged to make the best of a shitty situation. And the result of that has actually been a pretty significant success. Not only have they developed a guard culture with the Indigan prefects, but also they've managed to afford the SMSs. 50 of them, in fact, because again, Indiga itself would be a wealthy world if it wasn't completely covered in massive fucking Xenos creatures that want to kill and eat you. If it weren't for that tiny detail, things would be really nice on this world. But because things aren't really nice, we need these giant megastructures in order to both keep our people alive, scare away these giant creatures, and, arguably most importantly, efficiently collect all of the resources that we need while still on the move. Again, this is very Mortal Engines. We're talking about something that is incredibly massive. Even using the basis of the Irie, these things are huge, and they have a pretty significant job to do on Indiga, because of course, That's the primary way that they deal with the tithe. They make these massive circuitous routes around the planet's continent, stripping the surface layer, removing everything of value, and then bringing it to the spaceport to pretty much deposit and then get it taken off-world. And then, of course, they keep their own defense forces that they train up by effectively having them go and hunt down the more dangerous creatures that are in the way of these giant platforms, and then using the more elite or capable of those soldiers to make up the immobile portion of the group. Now, as far as our campaign goes, having gone over the actual background, what has happened in this couple of months, let's say? Well, we've had some newcomers, some friendly, some considerably less friendly. First off is Inquisitor Albrecht. Albrecht is a recent arrival, and this was an arrival that was certainly accepted with great pleasure by the current Principa of Indiga, that is their planetary governor. The Ordo Xenos Inquisitor is viewed as a boon to the planet, especially upon sighting of incoming enemy forces, but the Inquisitor seems to know nothing about it to start with. In fact, his arrival on Indiga was not planned, at least it wasn't cleared with any other Imperial forces, and let's just say that the Inquisitor has been rather quiet and secretive and considerably less helpful than the planetary government hoped that he would be. He is insular for particular reasons that we'll get to later. But let's be clear, he is certainly accepted on Indica, and they want him here because not only do they have local Xenos abominations to deal with, but in extension, they have incoming Xenos abominations. In this case, it takes the form of a falling green star. Now, that green star, as I'm sure many of you might expect, is not a legitimate star. Only a few days after the Inquisitor's arrival, an orcish kill cruiser is sighted on the approach to Indiga. Now, Indiga has limited orbital weaponry. As you might expect, this place only has one actual structure, and that is just a spaceport. But for what it has, it does its best, but it cannot stop a kill cruiser before it manages to, land. And I put land in heavy air quotes there because this orcish kill cruiser is not flying right, let's say. It's not doing well. There is detected significant damage, not to mention the fact that the orcs don't seem to be firing at anyone, rather just trying to beach themselves successfully on world. So something mysterious is going on that this Inquisitor seems to know nothing about. We'll see how well that works out for everyone involved in a bit, but first off, this falling star needs to be dealt with. And so, as they often do, the prefects deploy. Now, specifically, the orcish vessel, the kill cruiser, arrives in a mid-arc between SMS-3 and SMS-4. This leaves a smaller group of regular guard to go out and deal with them. As mentioned, there are 3 regiments on world. The most elite is the 40th. The 40th is called the Training Regiment of Indiga. In reality, it's made up of basically entirely veterans, which is one of the most unique things about Indiga, as opposed to most planets which raise the Imperial Guard off of the PDF, who don't necessarily have combat experience. They may just be more loyal or talented in a clinical sense. The Training Regiment of Indica is made up of very talented, very veteran, and experienced guardsmen who have spent years fighting Xenos abominations in the forests and have simply been selected to now be official guardsmen and, hopefully soon, be sent off-world. And as a result of that selection process, there are slightly fewer of them. Again, they're an elite unit, so about 20,000 heavy infantry. They have 2 primary weapons on top of their armor, which is a special modification of essentially Imperial carapace armor. Now, the breastplate and shoulder plates are fairly normal for something like full plaque. I would argue that the breastplate is definitely definitely more like carapace, whereas the shoulders and kind of the loin and groin areas definitely more like heavy flak. But neither here nor there. The stuff is clearly designed to be a little bit lighter in terms of like running, so you could almost call these guys assault heavy infantry, but they have some very unique twists. Again, this is a specialized regiment designed to do one thing very, very well, and that is reflected by their equipment. Specialized shotguns, and their only heavy weapon is las cannons. Now, why las cannons? And why, if they begin as mobile regiments, do they become heavy infantry regiments that don't have any vehicles? Well, it comes with that specialization. The vehicles are designed to keep up with the SMSs, so when they go off-world, and they don't need to keep up with any other forces anymore, they lose the vehicles in exchange for basically being the best of the best at what they do, and what they do is kill massive Xenos abominations, thus the las cannons. Now, some of us might also balk at the idea of a regiment that uses shotguns as a primary armament as opposed to las guns. There is a very good reason for this. The armor of the Indigan prefects is bought off-world. Almost certainly that stuff is imported. The shotguns, on the other hand, are an evolution of that tumultuous period where the planet was still reeling from effectively having a giant zoo of alien abominations dumped onto their planet. Some forces that were able to hold out were without supply for a significant amount of time and had to rely upon secondary options. One of those was very simply civilian pump-action shotguns. These not only became relatively common, but also were pretty widely accepted as good weapons for dealing with large, squishy opponents that could, in equivalence, be called, Xenos abominations, effectively. So they picked these up as a primary armament. Now, I'm not going to say that some of them don't have las guns in addition to that, but I will say that a majority of them favor this type of shotgun with its specialized ammunition as opposed to the las gun, unless they are in specific scenarios where they're not going to need it. And again, considering that the regiment is so small and is so elite, it would not be unreasonable to say that they might keep backup las guns as an alternate to their primary weapons. Now, their shotguns are specialized. They have 3 primary ammunition types that are almost universal. The most normal one is slug rounds. Now, of course, with choked up, long-barreled pump-action shotguns, slug rounds are a natural go-to, especially if you want to put down Xenos abominations quick, fast, and in a hurry. So slugs make a lot of sense. It's essentially just a thumb of lead that you shove down and you shoot at an enemy at high speed. Got a ton of stopping power, but it's not particularly good at penetrating any heavy or layered body armor. That's where we have the other 2 options. So we have darts. Now, the darts are essentially flèche rounds. If you don't know what flèche rounds are, they are essentially just a shit ton of metal spikes or metal darts shoved into a shot cup and then fired out of a shotgun. They are relatively inaccurate. They spread quite heavily, but they have the advantage of being able to go through other types of light body armor that a slug would not be able to. And they also have significant amounts of spread, meaning that they can suppress enemy targets quite easily, and because they are dart-shaped and not ball-shaped or BB-shaped, they have the ability to stick in enemies far more easily. And with enemies that are heavily armored, having a wounding or a debilitating effect using these darts would be a pretty effective one. The final and arguably the most specialized of the ammunition that the prefects use are dart rounds. Now, these dart rounds are not darts like poison darts, though they do contain poison. They are more accurately something of the equivalent of a composite rigid shell. They are a solid steel round with a very, very thin plastic cap that is effectively glued or adhesive to the front of it. They do wreak a little bit of havoc on the weapons, which is one of the reasons why they stick to pump-action shotguns instead of semi-automatic shotguns, because they use so many specialized rounds, and because these rounds tend to wear upon the barrel quite heavily, they don't want to use weapons that have a higher rate of failure, a la semi-automatic shotguns. The dart round travels faster, travels more accurately than the slug round, has more hitting power, has slightly more armor penetration, and more importantly, it can be coated with a fairly virulent poison, or mix of poisons. Now, these are designed more as a secondary effect of this heavy steel penetrating dart than anything else, but against lots of different enemies, something that just slows them down, especially with big creatures, it is enough. Not to mention that if you shoot a human-sized opponent with a steel dart covered in virulent toxin, yeah, they're probably dead, even if it doesn't actually penetrate, because that poison can be quite noxious. So, that's the elite training regiment. Those are the guys who are going to have the best equipment and probably the highest ratio of dart rounds as opposed to slug and fléché rounds. Now, in terms of how many of these they have per man, I would assume a standard loadout of somewhere around 50 shells total. And that's assuming absolute maximum, with probably 30 of them being slug rounds, an additional 15 being darts, and then the final 5 probably being those hard armor-penetrating solid dart rounds that have some poison on them. So I would say that it's a solid breakdown, with the more elite rounds probably being limited to 5 per person, because these are essentially universal special weapons. So again, very, very elite, with the main drawback being that this regiment of heavy infantry doesn't have vehicles, which is actually pretty abnormal for heavy infantry as a whole, but again, hyper specialized unit here. They are unlike the 33rd and 32nd Mobile regiments. They're a little bit beefier, 25,000 infantry, with their own unique twist. All of them are equipped, at least to a couple of companies' strength, with Centaur mobile infantry carriers. Now, these have been slightly modified, as you can see here, that they have been not necessarily heavily up-armored, but at least enclosed, to the point where they're a little bit more resistant to just random attacks from lighter enemies, such as, Dangerous and Vile Xenos, and they've had the addition of grafting a lot of their las cannons to this chassis. So rather than having to lug the las cannons around themselves, which the Elite 40th will have to do if they want to be on the move, which is why they're referred to as the Immobile Regiment, they are able to bring them along on the Centaurs. Now, to be clear, the Centaurs do not power these things alone. They would blow out their own engines if they tried. They are definitely more of a capacitor thing where they wear up the energy for the las cannons to fire, and then the las cannon can maybe store 1 to 2 shots worth of energy if the entire vehicle is essentially out of power. But again, they're not a tank. They're not powering these things with any degree of ease, and they're certainly not going to be making a dozen or so shots in quick succession, probably not even making it to 5 before the engine stalls out or the gun simply runs out of power. Now, they do have very similar arms to the above, but the regular mobile regiments are parsed out amongst each of the SMSs. So each of those massive mining structures, as you can see, with 2 25,000-man regiments, each of these structures has about 1,000 guardsmen on them. That's a pretty significant defense force, considering that there's about 13,000 people on board of each of these SMSs. That gives you a solid, 6 to 7% of the population being armed on each of these structures, and then a solid portion of the, elite regiment being back at the immobile section at the capital spaceport. So, having gone over the prefects, what is this falling star, this orcish kill cruiser, consist of, and why in God's name are they here? Well, this is somebody that we might know and love, War Boss Mardrug. Now, if you haven't heard Mardrug's name before, he's a blood axe, and he's coming off of what I would argue is a proper good fight. Not one that he's necessarily happy he had to leave, but a proper good one, no doubt. His orcish cruiser has about 8,000 seasoned boys on it, but they've seen better days, let's say, his 8,000 boys. Now, Mardrug is a blood axe. He's a very, very talented commander in terms of orcish fashion, of course, and he's come up with some very intelligent ways of getting a good proper scrap in. And one of those has been following around Tyranid hive fleets. Yeah, he's been going around following splinter fleets and attacking worlds that they are actively attacking, with the goal of either preying upon weakened enemies in order to get them to fight even harder, or just straight up fighting people that the Tyranids have already decimated. Which, for an orc, is proper cunning right there. That is a smart move. And he's got a reputation and a pretty impressive track record if you want to check his lore. The man has some impressive achievements, or rather I should say the war boss, and at this point in his life, he's been pretty successful. He's run into a spot of bother, however, because his chasing of the Hive Fleet have finally caught up with him. He's not fleeing to Indiga for a fight, he's fleeing from something, and we'll see that in a bit. The poor bastard may have bit off a little bit more than he could chew. So, that orcish cruiser smashes into the area between SMS 3 and 4, and they are relatively disorganized. Now, again, these are blood axes. They have a good number of commandos, plenty of specialty boys, and an odd proclivity towards Burnas for some reason that we'll see later. But they effectively crash land upon the planet. Their ship is basically totaled. They don't have a ton of mech boys, probably less than a dozen or so in the entire warband, so their ability to try and get this thing off planet without any external help is not likely. So having the awareness that this ship is likely trashed, well, they do what the orcs are gonna do. They start trying to adapt to their surroundings. They don't have long, however. About 2,000 prefects rapidly approach the landing site. Now, these are groups from the 33rd Mobile Regiment, and it's about 2,000 strong. Now, again, these are the mobile centaur infantry type, accompanied by a lot of their fellow infantry. Again, about a company or so of the entire regiment is able to be fully mechanized or fully mobile, so the rest of them are on foot. It is effectively a 1-to-10 ratio, so out of 1,000, or out of 2,000 rather, 200 of them are able to fit in centaurs, and the remainder are on foot, which means that the centaurs are going to reach their enemy first. There is an initial contact here that I'd like to highlight just a little bit. There is a unique thing with the Blood Axes in that they are tactical, shall we say. They have begun to elicit some human levels of mental operation when it comes to the search of war or the goal of combat. They actually have scouts and grots out on the long perimeter of their ship's crash site. But these scouts are fighting against the cream of the 33rd's crop. The mechanized Indigans pretty rapidly roll over these troops. Now, grots are not all that dangerous, but in large enough numbers they can be a threat. However, the Indigans are essentially perfectly kitted out for dealing with grots. The small grot shootas are not really able to penetrate them center mass, and they will only get a wounding shot if they fire anywhere where they have heavy armor. In addition, the dart rounds and the flechet rounds, not to mention the slug rounds, can pretty quickly put down a grot, even if they are hiding or camouflaged. Flechet rounds have the unique ability to shred through foliage, and will rapidly put down the poor little bastards quite effectively. Even the Blood Axe scouts under Mardrug's actual command, though they are a little bit more veteran and quite more capable than the grots, they're also facing up against enemies that outnumber them, at least at this early stage. It's not the full 8,000 orcs out here, it's probably less than a couple hundred, and many of them, though they're able to run back through the jungle and tell the rest of the orcs that the Imperial Guard boys be coming, a lot of them are absolutely wiped out for pretty low losses on the prefect side. Now, choppas and shootas are far more effective when in the hands of an orc than they are in the hands of a grot. But even so, in terms of discipline, organization, and knowledge of the local terrain, the Indigans have spent their entire life hunting through these jungles. The orcs have just crash landed here. They are effectively out of their element and actively getting destroyed by the Imperial Guardsmen. But that's the exterior. What about the actual outlying sections of this wreck? Well, as the prefects reorganize and begin to converge around the actual wreck itself, they observe several things. First off, there's a strange material spread in a wide circle along the extent of the impact zone for the kill cruiser. This strange material is shall we say, alive in a way that orcish material isn't supposed to be. It's a mix of greenish slime and yellowish pink chitin, or pus almost, that is roiling and squeezing and pushing into the ground as if it were living tree roots. This material, after some experimentation, aka they shot it a few times with a shotgun and saw if that worked, is deemed to be at least semi-biological in origin. It's also noted that several of the local flora and fauna, including at least a couple of Xenos abominations, are seen actively devouring this living mass of flesh. Those creatures that are seen eating the stuff are put down because, of course, that probably isn't healthy for them, not to mention the fact that it does certainly smack of some Xenos trickery, but for better or worse, the Indigan prefects don't really know what they're looking at just yet. They've never seen what they're about to see in very large numbers. And finally, they get into the interior of what we could call the orcish camp. Mardrug has probably at least 5,000 or 6,000 boys just hanging around the remains of the kill cruiser, grabbing whatever materials and items his mech boys need in order to create a new ship elsewhere. When he's taken not necessarily by surprise, but at least unawares by the large number of Imperial Guardsmen. Now, without a chance to prepare, without a chance to defend, we all know exactly what a Blood Axe is going to do when it comes time to face this kind of enemy. And yeah, you would think it's run away, but it's not. They actually do manage several successful counterattacks. Is it really a counterattack if you're running at the enemy, shooting and gatting a couple of them, and then running away again? I'm not exactly sure, but let's just shake it down to this. The average engagement between the orcs and the Indigans is oddly one-sided. Not necessarily because the orcs are here unprepared, but more specifically because the Indigans have a significant firepower advantage over the average orc. The orcs don't have many vehicles, which means that the las cannons the Indigans have are able to be used on the enemy infantry. That means that the heaviest infantry available to the orcs, aka knobs and mega knobs, are very vulnerable to getting shot out by las cannon blasts, and the vehicles that the las cannons are mounted on are resistant/immune to all but the heaviest weapons that the Blood Axes have access to. The Burnas, while useful against the infantry, are certainly going to struggle against those Centaur mobile infantry carriers, and of course, even with that said, due to the fact that the enemy has shotguns, they're not facing the significant resistive issue of trying to use las guns against fully grown and full armored orcs. The orcs discover firsthand that these Indigan slug rounds and these Indigan flèche rounds are quite damaging, and they cause significant amounts of flesh damage and soft tissue damage that render many of the Blood Axes so severely wounded as to not be able to continue fighting. We're talking about missing limbs here at the very least, and we're talking about essentially getting so peppered with dart rounds that you become a piñata on the heavier end. So, as far as I say the orcs are successful in their counterattack, they at least keep the Indigan prefects off until nightfall. The losses, however, are one-sided, or rather a little bit lopsided. The prefects only lose a couple hundred men, topping out at around 300 for the day out of their 2,000 deployed, whereas the orcs, in totality, lose somewhere around 2,000, a significant loss, mostly gainsaid by the fact that the orcs have managed to hold their position, and due to the recurring fact that shit's about to get a lot worse on this planet than it currently is, the guardsmen are about to get pulled back for a much bigger problem. Now, could the guardsmen have wiped out Mardrug's entire group here? Maybe, maybe not. It may have taken more support. It may have taken another group of forces showing up from yet another SMS that is passing. Again, there are 50 of them, always moving in relative sequence so that they can help one another. So really, the prefect companies are never too far apart from one another. They're always within some sort of mutual aid distance, which is why these two are simply the first to get on scene. So it's possible that they could have dug in for the night, or maybe even retreated, and then tried to ruin their entire day in the morning, but the orcs catch a break, because the guardsmen are called back to the SMS, because the spaceport's astropaths have noted incoming hostile enemy vessels. And not of the orcish type this time. The central capital, the spaceport essentially, marks and tracks and engages two separate targets, prepping their orbital defenses and then completely letting them loose, as these are enemies that no Imperial planet wants to see at any point in time, certainly not in conjunction with an orcish raid, which is what Mardrug's advance seems to have been. Now, the primary problem, and arguably one of the most dangerous things here, is the Eldar. Craftworld Alytok is known for many things, but most specifically, they're known for separatism. They're a group of Eldar who are deeply connected to their Corsair heritage, fully devoted to the fate-weaving Eldar path, and they are hell-bent upon avenging themselves upon someone on this world because they have shown up with a fucking cruiser to this random backworld planet. Now again, Corsairs, that's a lot of firepower investment, and they must have a very good reason for being here. I wonder why it is. So, unknown to anyone, save for the Inquisitor Albrecht, one of his prisoners is the reason for the presence of Alytok here. Archon, a Farseer. This Inquisitor kidnapped, or rather captured, a Farseer from Alytok, and has managed to bring them to this unsuspecting planet, hoping to torture information out of them. Alytok, not taking that shit laying down, is preparing an entire dragon ship, at least, to invade the planet. And, yeah, that's never a good thing. Just to be clear, Alytok is not friendly with the Imperium. There are some Eldar that can go back. Alytok is not one of those Eldar groups that is cool with working with Imperials. We'll see what happens with that dynamic later, because there's an even bigger fish, as usual. At this point, we're on, like, what? Level 5 of horrifying Xenos abominations? First, you've got what's normal for Indiga, then you've got the Orcs, then you've got the Eldar, then you've got the Tyranids. Can you tell that this was a special request from my channel? Yeah. So, the Tyranids, a tiny little splinter of High Fleet Leviathan, has chased the Orcs from the world of Kantos 2. Mardrug, you fucking bastard, you brought the splinter fleet that you were chasing along with you, and yes, that is who they're going after. They are heading after the Orcs because, well, they've noticed that these creatures tend to show up and dog their steps, escaping them for a long period of time, so they gained up enough biomass to send a specialized splinter to come and obliterate these creatures. Unfortunately, Mardrug, much like the Inquisitor, just so happened to draw them to Indiga, along with Alytok being drawn to Indiga. So we have possibly the worst possible day for any Imperial world short of Cadia. So, feeling the conflux of psychic energy from the Eldar, from the various Farseers in the area, the Orcs, and the standard Imperial planet's astropaths, along with the normal forces in the area, the biomass that Indiga already has, they have no choice but to attack Indiga. The Tyranids are drawn to this place beyond just having been told to obliterate those annoying Orcs that keep chasing them around. Now, this is Leviathan, and they're known for many things, but the Shadow in the Warp is one of them. The problem here is, this is a pretty tiny splinter. It's basically one large hive ship and a couple of smaller bioforms flowing around it. That means it can't really extend the Shadow very far, essentially around some of its more powerful creatures, and within the local area of their own ship, they can extend the Shadow in the Warp. So even the astropaths of the planet are only mildly inconvenienced to possibly severely upset by the fact that the Tyranids are here. They can call out for help, and you might imagine they certainly begin to do so, screaming into the warp for somebody to God please help us. Yeah, well, we'll get there later. So, what happens here? Well, the dragon ship is preparing to invade. They have to get down to the planet's surface, the Eldar reaching out into the warp and noticing several different concerning factors. Now, The dragon ship is an elegant creation. It is a beautiful, handcrafted wraithbone vessel that is designed for all different types of combat and activities. What it is not designed for, however, is to suddenly get attacked by a very, very hungry Tyranid bioship. So, to be clear, this is exactly how this goes down. The Eldar, having already gone into the gravity well of the planet, have already prepared themselves to transmit forces onto the planet's surface, are accosted by a Tyranid vessel that has been traveling very, very quickly over a very long distance and has gained a whole hell of a lot of steam heading right for Indiga's surface. Now, as they are the most psychically powerful signature on the planet, the Tyranids seek to snuff out that sequence, hoping that it will be one of the most delicious forces available on the planet. They're wrong, but it's not to any of their knowledge, as the Eldar ship is hooked onto the Eldar dragon ship. Now, of course, the Eldar ship is faster, it is more maneuverable, but it was expecting this to be a normal ship. It is not. The Leviathan vessel hooks itself onto the Eldar ship with a mix of massive claws and huge tentacles, and, due to the fact that it's able to extend the shadow and the warp just marginally around the ship itself, it is able to shut down key portions of the dragon ship for long enough for the Eldar vessel to be crippled and to fall into the planet's gravity well. At the absolute last moment, the vessel pushes itself slightly away from the doomed Tyranid vessel, but they both end up falling onto the surface. Very much an unfortunate series of events, even for the Eldar. They certainly aren't used to being attacked by these creatures, and normally when they're going to engage the Tyranids, they do so from extreme range. Having already been in the planetary invasion stance, however, and also having a severe focus upon getting down to the planet quickly, and then escorting themselves out even quicker, they happened to underestimate both the acceleration and the grappling capabilities of the Tyranid vessels. So, that leaves us with the absolutely horrific situation of having the Orcs, SMS 3 and 4, the Eldar vessel, and the Tyranids, all within a few hundred miles of one another, on Indiga's surface, all angry as hornets, and all prepping to cause massive amounts of destruction for everyone else involved. It is a particularly bad day to be an Imperial planet, let me just say. Shit is absolutely out of pocket for them. Now, again, this is the intro for this series. We will be doing, I would say, a 2 to 3 on this one. We'll see how many episodes it takes. Of course, there will be a vote on what we're doing for this one, depending on how Adversaries goes. There will be more videos coming up before that vote. I hope that you guys enjoyed. Naturally, credit goes to GW, KW, Fuger, Jill Vasquez, Thanian Pepelachai, John Michaelback, Oridis, Muskibiat Khan, Samuel Allen, David Gallagher, and our vote, prospective for this, is going to be, of the 3 Xenos factions on planet, what do our Imperials do about this? I mean, they really are outgunned here. The forces on an Orc cruiser are probably something that they can deal with. The forces on an Eldar cruiser, on the other hand, are pretty fucking far from deal with scenario. Not to mention that the Tyranids are here, and God knows that they can balloon out of size quite quickly. We also have a scenario where it's unlikely that the Eldar are going to see the error of their ways and happily turn over a new leaf to work with the Imperials. So we will see. We will leave that up to your guys' vote. I hope that you all enjoyed this deep dive into Indiga. I know I took great pleasure in fleshing out a good deal of their lore. It was really fun to do. They're a great planet, and let me know what you think about it, because I know we have pretty limited lore to work from in terms of this one world, and building up the structures within it and how they function and how their society and economy works was really a pleasure for me. It's one of my favorite things to do in 40K. So, I hope that you enjoyed. I hope that you have a wonderful week. And I wish you all a lovely good night.